The fifth session for the theory for creation. And I hope that you understand clearly that what I want to do is I want to strengthen your faith in God. Faith in Greek means I trust, I believe, I have faith. In English, we have three words. In Greek, it is one and the same word. So when I say we want to strengthen your faith in God, we want to strengthen your trust in God. We want to strengthen your belief. I don't know what happened there. We want to strengthen your belief in God. We want to strengthen your faith in God, your trust in God. And we want to do it by looking at the evidence. We don't want to go by blind faith. We want to look at the evidence. We want to consider the evidence that the Lord has left us. And that's what we've been doing. We've been looking at the evidence. I'm going to show you a little bit more evidence today. We don't have a lot more evidence to go through, so today is a milestone because today we'll be starting to look at the theory, and the theory is going to help to put things together. All right? I wanted to show you this picture just before I started. And this is a little dinosaur. Can you see? I don't know if it's clear enough on the screen. I don't know if you can see. It's beautiful. Can you see the pattern here in the scales? And I don't know if you noticed, but this is bright blue. It's bright blue here and here. Can you see that? Have you seen a hummingbird? You know what a hummingbird looks like? And you see the iridescent feathers under its throat? It's that kind of blue. Adrian, can we turn the lights down for a minute? Just so you can see it. I want you to see this. More. Can we darken a little bit more? Anyway, I don't know. Can you see that? Here and here. It's brilliant blue. Now, you know that I showed you some pictures of dinosaurs that people have drawn. But is that the way they really look? I don't think so. I think that God put all kinds of colors on them or patterns. If you look at this guy, there's a little red patch right there, a little tiny red patch, and then this brilliant blue here and here. To me, that's what the dinosaurs also would have looked like. They would have had beautiful patterns on their scales, and God may have put colors on some, and other things. Just really beautiful. I wanted you to see that. This little guy decided to pose for me, so I took his picture. This is an eastern fence lizard that I took. This is my photograph. I took this in Missouri. Just a beautiful little dinosaur there. Part 5. Remember that whatever theory you believe, we're going to start the theory part today. Remember that my purpose is not to get you to believe my theory. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is whatever theory you believe, you want to be able to follow that it fits the Bible, that it fits the existing evidence, and it follows the laws of science. If any theory doesn't follow all three of those, then it has a major problem. Right? So, I don't talk much about the theory of evolution because many others have done a lot of talking about it. If you want to see stuff about the theory of evolution, go to Answers in Genesis and look up some of what Ken Ham says. Or go to the Institute for Creation Research and look at what they have done. Or go to drdino.com, drdino.com, and listen to Kent Hovind. And if you check out those guys, you will see that evolution does not have any legs to stand on. But my approach is not from that point of view. My approach is we're Christians. We believe in God. We believe in the Bible. We believe that what he said about how he created the world is true. And then because of sin, he destroyed the whole world with a worldwide flood. That's my starting point, all right? But whatever theory you believe, remember these three premises and check it out. And if the theory that you are considering doesn't fit these three premises, then I would ask you to come back and reconsider. Not that mine is 100% accurate. No, it may not be. But it fits those three criteria. That's what I want you to check. All right? And if, by the way, the Lord shows you something that I have not considered, that could very well happen. Please tell me. I would be keen to hear what he's shown you. All right? The existing evidence, we're almost through. We've considered the mammoths frozen in the north. We've looked at the quantity of fossil fuels. We have a huge quantity of fossil fuels, diminishing, by the way. We've looked at subtropical evidence for subtropical Arctic and Antarctic. We've looked at the megafauna and the large dinosaurs. We've looked at amber with bubbles, analyzed by USGS, United States Geological Survey, 35% oxygen in the bubbles. We've looked at much longer life, that's from the Bible, the genealogies from the Bible. We looked at living fossils, and by the way, remember that the 35% oxygen, actually we'll look at that. I may be getting ahead of myself. We'll look at that in a little bit. We'll look at the oxygen and look at the long life. Okay, the change in length of life, we'll look at that together. Okay, so living fossils, we looked at living fossils. We looked at how no change, no major change in any living fossil. And the living fossils have been dated by evolutionists to hundreds of millions of years, no change, right? We looked briefly at water above and below the firmament. This is from Genesis. God created the world. Remember, God created the firmament, and then he separated the waters from the waters and put water above the firmament and water below the firmament. And we looked at no rain before the flood. We looked at evidence for no rain before the flood. Now we're going to look at George F. Dodwell, who was an Australian government astronomer. And we're going to look at evidence for an ice age post-flood, after the flood. There was an ice age after the flood. We have evidence for it. We'll look at that. Then we'll look at the theory. We'll start the theory, okay? George Frederick Dodwell lived from 1879 to 1963. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Adelaide in Australia, but originally he's from England. He became the Australian government astronomer. He worked for the Australian government. He wrote this letter to a colleague of René Nurburgren. René Nurburgren, if you recall, is a Seventh-day Adventist, or was. I believe that he's passed away now. If you don't mind, excuse me just for a sec. I want to just change this to... I believe that René Nurburgren has passed away now, but he was a Seventh-day Adventist. He went to Turkey to search for Noah's Ark. And he wrote a book. I've forgotten the name of the book. Do you remember? Noah's Ark. I think it was called Noah's Ark. He wrote a book called Noah's Ark. And in his book is this letter from George Dodwell. This is a quote from the book. Writing in regard to the recent expedition to Turkey, Dodwell stated, "I am especially interested in such a remarkable result." The result was Nurburgren claimed he found the Ark, okay? He said, "I'm extremely interested in such a remarkable result because I have been making during the last 26 years an extensive investigation of what we know in astronomy as the secular variation of the obliquity of the ecliptic. I'll explain. And from a study of the available ancient observations of the position of the sun at the solstices during the last 3,000 years, I find a curve which, after allowing for all known changes, shows a typical exponential curve of recovery of the Earth's axis after a sudden change from a former nearly vertical position to an inclination of 26.5 degrees, from which it has returned to an equilibrium at the present inclination of 23.5 degrees during the interval of the succeeding 3,194 years to AD 1850. The date of the change in the Earth's axis, 2345 BC. He continued, is none other than that of the flood recorded in the Bible. And the resulting conclusion is that the biblical account of the flood as a universal one, together with its story of Noah's Ark, is historically true. The secular variation of the obliquity of the ecliptic. Secular, in terms of astronomy, means slow over a long period of time. Slow over a long period of time. So secular variation means the change, the slow change over a long period of time in the obliquity of the ecliptic. The obliquity is the angle. And the ecliptic is the path that the sun takes across the sky. Does somebody have a piece of paper here? Can I? Yes, thank you. You have to use your imagination a little bit, okay? If I am standing on the Earth, the sun is not horizontal with the Earth, correct? I don't see the sun rising directly in the east and traveling perpendicular to me across to the west, correct? Rather, I see it in the sky. It's up. The angle is up. Do you follow that? And so now I see it rise in the east, and it travels across the sky like this. So the obliquity of the ecliptic is measuring what angle from perpendicular is the sun crossing the sky. Okay? So, is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Since the Earth now has a tilt of 23.5 degrees, if you buy a globe, the globe is tilted for you already. It's tilted at 23.5 degrees because that's where it is today. All right? But it was not always there. And that is what he measured. If the tilt of the Earth was not always 23.5 degrees, he says it was nearly vertical from his discoveries, from his research. It was nearly vertical. Do you see that the angle of the sun in the sky would be different? Wherever you are on the globe, we are in Singapore, so we are here. If I tilt the Earth, do you see the angle of the sun coming across the sky is going to be different? Dodwell went back to many sources to study this. He went back to the ancient Egyptians. He went back to the ancient Chinese. He went back to the Greeks, Eratosthenes and others. He went back to Stonehenge in England. He studied some sun temples in South America. So all over the world, he's looking. And astronomers from each of these countries were measuring the angle of the sun at the summer solstice, and the winter solstice. Solstice, longest day, shortest day, right? And they were using intricate instruments of measure. Dodwell records these and graphs them. And according to his discovery, what he found, the Earth's axis was originally nearly vertical, tipped to 26.5 degrees, and came back to 23.5 degrees where it is now. I'm going to show you some of what he presented. Now, okay, let me see. Right now, scientists believe that the Earth has what is called precession. And this is a diagram of the Earth, and you can see here is the axis, okay, going from North Pole to South Pole. And these white arrows indicate the daily rotation. But the North Pole also rotates, they say. And so if the North Pole is rotating in a circle like this, then what is the South Pole doing? Same thing, right? So they're saying the North Pole rotates. And so the North Pole is rotating like this in that circle, and the South Pole also will be doing the same thing. Do you see that? That rotation is called in science precession. And that rotation, as scientists today have calculated it, takes 25,771.5 years. So if you look up in the night sky and you see Polaris, I'm not sure if you can see Polaris from here, but if you see Polaris, the North Pole points almost directly at Polaris. But 13,000 years from now, it's going to be pointing over here. The Earth is going to be tilted exactly the other way. Does that make sense? That's precession. Okay? That's not what Dodwell studied. Okay? That is not what Dodwell studied. But I wanted to show you that. Now here are some notes. Eudoxus. Eudoxus lived from 400 to 347 BC. He was a Greek mathematician, a geographer, and an astronomer. He was apparently a very educated man. He made careful descriptions of the North Celestial Pole, the point in the sky around which the stars appear to rotate. If you think about that, since the stars are not rotating, we are rotating. If you find the North Celestial Pole, then you have found exactly where the Earth's axis is. And as we rotate around, then the stars will appear to move. The stars will appear to move around that point. And it is currently very close to the North Star. All right. So Dodwell looked at the calculations of Eudoxus and found a problem. The problem is that somebody has come up with a formula. And they say that the Earth's axis went from maybe 24 degrees to 23.5 degrees over 3, 4, 5,000 years, maybe longer. Okay, so maybe they say maybe. I'll show you a chart later. I'll show you a chart. And they say maybe it went from 24 degrees to 23.5 degrees. But if you draw a graph and you chart it, it doesn't line up. It doesn't match. Eudoxus's observations don't fit on that line. I'll show you the graph. All right? If you try to fit Eudoxus's observations, what he calculated, it would make Eudoxus live around 1900 BC. But he lived in 350 BC, 350 years before Christ. He didn't live 1900 years before Christ. He lived 350 years before Christ. So he looked at that and found something is wrong. Now he looked at Stonehenge. Stonehenge was dated to the Druids in 350 BC, same time period. Stonehenge, if you don't remember, is a monument set up for worship of the sun. And the way Stonehenge is set up, the sun at the summer solstice will shine on some particular thing or shine through. There is something that lines up at the summer solstice, the longest day of the earth. All right? So Stonehenge was dated to the Druids, 350 BC. But if you look at modern astronomical research, they date it to 1500 to 1900 BC. 1200 to 1600 years differently. The reason for the change in dates is that the astronomical solstice measurements, which Stonehenge was built to observe, would not, according to reverse projections from current planetary positions, have been possible in 350 BC. In other words, if you believe that the Earth's axis has never tilted, and you go back to 350 BC, the obliquity of the ecliptic is in the wrong place for Stonehenge to work. You would have to move Stonehenge back to 1500 to 1900 BC. Does that make sense? Yeah. So Dodwell says, well, there's a problem. Something is wrong. And then he looked, I'm only giving you 3 examples. He looked at many more, okay? And by the way, Jeremy, you saw this in KL, and I gave these examples. At that time, I did not have George Dodwell's paper. I found it on the internet, okay? It's called The Obliquity of the Ecliptic, and you can find it. I believe that Barry Setterfield published it. I think that Barry is Seventh-day Adventist from Australia, and he published, it's 228 pages, and it's very scientific. I'm going to show you part of it, okay? So let's take a look. Let me do that right now, because that's what I want to do. That's where we're at. This is a picture of George Dodwell. I'm going to go down a little too far, and then I'm going to go back up because I want to show you something. But just to take a look down here, this axis contains degrees. So 26, this is 26 degrees, 30 minutes. In a degree, if you go by minutes, there are 60 minutes in 1 degree. So 26 degrees, 30 minutes is 26 and a half degrees. Okay? If you look at Dodwell's curve, here's Dodwell's curve coming down right here. And it comes right down. This is years on this axis. So here's degrees on this axis. Here's years on this axis. And if you look, the curve comes right down here, 2345. Okay? He made observations, I don't know if I mentioned, he made observations at the solar temple of Amun-Ra in Egypt. Modern astronomers use Newcomb's formula. Here is Newcomb's formula. And here is the line for Newcomb's formula on a graph. It's not an exponential curve. If you look here, there's a dot right there. This dot was from what was recorded by astronomers at Karnak in Egypt. When is the date? 2045 BC. 2045 BC. They measured the obliquity of the ecliptic and it sits right there. Here's another one from Karnak, from the solar temple of Amun-Ra in Egypt, 1570 BC. The point is right there. Here are points from the ancient Chinese. These are from ancient Hindus, Chinese. The Greeks are somewhere here. This is Eratosthenes. I'm sorry, I can't read all these here. Here's Ptolemy. Ptolemy, the point is right there. There are a few points off the graph here, but generally they follow this curve. Do you see that? Now, Newcomb's formula, if you come to recent years, because this is the year 2000 AD, okay? Here he has the year 0. There was no year 0, by the way. So you would have come down from 2345 BC down to 1 BC, and then 1 AD. Okay, there was no year 0. But then you come forward 200, 400, 600, until 2000 AD, right here. So if you look at Newcomb's formula, and you calculate the dots from fairly recent astronomical observations of the obliquity of the ecliptic, then you may think that Newcomb's line is correct. Did you see that? Because there are many dots here. 3, 4, 5, 6 dots there, 3, 4, 5, 6 dots there. I can't see them all. And Dodwell has recorded all of who recorded the obliquity of the ecliptic at the summer and winter solstice, who recorded it, each one of those dots. Okay? So if you just took these few here, this is from about 800, AD to 2000 AD, you might think that Newcomb's formula would work, that this line would fit. But when you start looking at the ancient Hindus, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Chinese, and the ancient Egyptians at Karnak in 1570 and 2045, was it? Then Newcomb's formula doesn't fit. And see, Newcomb goes from about 24 degrees and 3 minutes. This is 5 minutes here. 24 degrees, 5 minutes. So he's about 24 degrees, 3 minutes to 23 degrees, 30 minutes. Okay, 23 degrees, 30 minutes, 23 and a half degrees, this is where we are now. But if you see where the observations actually lie, they follow Dodwell's curve. They don't follow Newcomb's curve. Does this make sense? A little bit of science, I know. I'll just show you briefly some of the... Oh, I wanted to mention something. This is the devil's perception of the progression of man from evolution. You start with a single cell, right? And then you end up with a fish. Remember, my artwork is very bad, okay? And then an amphibian, then a land animal, mammal, man, right? And man is increasing. And so the devil's perception of what's happening with intelligence, with knowledge, is this. Does this make sense? According to the devil's idea, the ancient people were not as smart as we are. They were not as knowledgeable as we are. Do you follow this? But here is what God says. God says, I created everything and I created it perfect. The most intelligent beings who have ever lived on earth were who? Adam and Eve. So God says, look, I created them and I made them perfect. So here's Adam and Eve. And then sin came and caused corruption and problems and degradation. And so from God's point of view, we are going like this to today. Do you see that? If you look back, those guys were not ignorant about what they were doing. And their measurements were very careful. They were worshiping the sun, moon, and stars. It was not some activity that they didn't think was important. I want to point that out to you. I'll just briefly show you some of the instruments that they used to measure with. This is Dodwell's actual paper. Setterfield added some notes, a preface. He added a preface in there, but basically this is Dodwell's paper. It's 228 pages long. It's very scholarly. If you're interested, you can find it online on the internet. Here are some of the instruments that they use to measure. These are not simple instruments. They're very accurate. This one is in China. It's a gnomon. A gnomon they used at the summer solstice and the winter solstice. This gnomon is the height and the proportions, the dimensions are very carefully calculated so that when the sun casts its shadow, it will cast its shadow down along this path here, and they can measure how long and how short the shadow is. And by doing that, they can calculate the obliquity of the ecliptic. I don't know how they do all the calculations. That's another gnomon, a sundial. This is in Rome. Here's another one. This is I don't know if this is a diagram or a photograph, but here's the gnomon, here's the shadow, and they have this all laid out in a graph on the ground so that at the summer and winter solstice they can measure, they can check. And there are others, okay? I won't go through any more, but just to let you know, there are others. The last little bit of evidence that we're going to look at is evidence for an ice age. This picture was one that I took. This is taken in Alaska at the Mendenhall Glacier. This rock is granite, and these lines carved in the rock are because the glacier has slid back over the rock with other stones underneath it. And because of the weight of the glacier, it actually will scratch the granite. These rocks are not only found here, they're found in southern Ontario, in the Canadian Shield, way down from up north, okay? You don't have to go to Alaska. This is Alaska because we were there. But you don't have to go to Alaska. You can find this in the Canadian Shield. You can find it in southern Ontario, all right, as well, near Toronto, north of Toronto, just north of Toronto. Okay, you'll find it in the rocks there as well. Scrape marks. These scrape marks are called striae, S-T-R-A-I-E, striae, in rocks. This one is in Juneau, Alaska at the Mendenhall Glacier. Boulders. They have found boulders that weigh hundreds of pounds, maybe thousands of pounds. And what they find is that the surrounding rocks are not the same as the kind of rock, the type of rock the boulder is made from. But if you look maybe a mile away, you will find other rocks that are the same. And so their question was, how did this boulder, this large rock, how did this large rock get to be 1 mile away from the rest? And why is it the only rock there? And what they believe is that this boulder rolled down onto a glacier, and the glacier melted and moved. Glaciers flow. Glaciers are not static. I don't know if you knew that. Glaciers move. Glaciers flow like rivers, but very slowly. Rivers move relatively quickly, but glaciers flow very slowly, but they move. They flow like rivers. And so as the glacier is melting and flowing, the boulder has fallen onto the glacier, and the boulder is being moved by the glacier until it's a mile away from where it was originally. Make sense? So evidence again, okay? And the third piece of evidence is moraines. In British Columbia, where we were, we went hiking with the Pathfinders, and we climbed up to a glacier with a huge moraine. The moraine is very tall on both sides. A moraine is rocks that have been left behind as the glacier moved and melted. The moraine from this glacier must be 5 meters high, maybe more than that, 7 meters high. And the moraine is made up of huge rocks. It's not small rocks. These are very large rocks that have fallen onto the glacier. As the glacier has moved and melted, the boulders fall off. The rocks fall off on the sides, on the two sides. And we climbed up on the moraine and walked along the top of the moraine right to the glacier. We walked up to the glacier that had left the moraine. The glacier has melted way back. I don't know how far, at least a couple of kilometers. Is moved back, maybe more than that. We hiked a long way up onto the glacier. And the moraine on both sides is very tall. Huge rocks, large rocks. And you can see the path of the glacier as it receded, as it moved back. Well, we have these all over the northern hemisphere, all over the world, where moraines have been left by glaciers from the Ice Age, okay? And we have apparently ice-carved lakes, fjords, and valleys, such as the Yosemite Valley. It's believed that the Yosemite Valley was carved by glaciers. I don't know how true that is, but that's what the claim is. It was carved by glaciers, all right? And if you look at a map of the Ice Age as described by evolutionary scientists, they will show you where the ice came down. And I believe in the United States it came down as low as Missouri, as far south as Missouri, somewhere about there, okay? The Ice Age would have been uniform north and south. So, of course, you might not have noticed much in the ocean, but Australia would have it. Or maybe South America or South Africa, you would see the same kind of evidence, all right? Remember, what I'm talking about is an ice age after the flood. I'll show you later why. Now we're going to start the theory part, all right? So far, we have been looking at evidence. Evidence that has been left that we can see, that we can sense with our five senses. Now we're going to go into the theory part. The theory is going to help, I hope, tie together some of the evidence, all right? But remember this, it's just a theory. In the hierarchy of things, in modern science, the way we look at things is this. First, I might have an idea. My idea is no better than your idea. Or your idea. It has no one can say that my idea is better than yours or that yours is better than mine. Nobody knows. It's just my idea. It's just my thought. But if I begin to think that there might be something to my thought, there might be some way of looking and finding evidence for my thought, then I will propose a hypothesis. In scientific thinking, modern scientific thinking, a hypothesis has a little bit more weight than just an idea. Does that make sense? It's a little bit, but still, there's not necessarily any evidence for it, but I'm thinking that it's a little stronger than just a thought. Make sense? And the next stage is going to be a theory. And the theory is supposed to have evidence. So when we call something a theory, we're saying there's evidence to back up the thought. I might have started with my thought, it may have developed into a hypothesis, and now it's a theory. And the theory, I'm calling it a theory because I have evidence to back up my thought. Make sense? So this is my theory, but it's only a theory. I could be wrong. It could be that I'm partly right. It could be that the Lord might show you something a little different. It's possible. But what I want to do is suggest that you look at it and consider it. If you don't agree with it, it's fine. But if you don't agree with it, remember the three premises. Whatever theory you agree with, you want to make sure it fits the Bible, the evidence, and the laws of science. And if you don't find anything else, then remember this one. Because I can tell you that in my studies, if I look at the theory of evolution, there's no evidence. I wouldn't even call it a theory. I don't even think it's a hypothesis. I find that what has happened in the theory of evolution is that hoaxes have been perpetrated on people. I can name them for you. Piltdown Man in the Natural History Museum in London was supposed to be a missing link, part man, part ape. It was in the London Museum of Natural History for 50 years until an American orthodontist said, I would like to examine it. And so he made arrangements and he went and examined it. An orthodontist is a dentist. He deals with teeth. And he looked and he said, what I found is that somebody had taken the jaw of an ape and filed the top of the jaw and the teeth so that it would fit the top part of a human skull. It was in the Museum of Natural History in London for 50 years. Ernst Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel is a German fellow, scientist, supposedly. He taught at a university, I forget the name of his university, And he came up with this phrase, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. He based this phrase, what this means is ontogeny, I don't know exactly the meaning, okay, but basically he's saying that what happens in development is going to determine what the creature looks like, okay? And he produced a series of photographs showing different embryos. And I don't remember exactly what embryos, but maybe the embryo of a fish, maybe the embryo of a rat, maybe an embryo of a monkey, and maybe a human embryo. There were 4 or 5. And he shows that each embryo goes through the same stages. At first, it looks like a fish. Then it looks like it has gills and so on, okay? And then it looks like an amphibian. And then it looks like a mammal. And finally, it develops into whatever it is. And he said all embryos go through the same developmental stages, and therefore ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. And he published this in a scientific journal, and it was published in scientific textbooks, and the last I heard, in about the year 2000, it was still being published in some scientific textbooks. But if you go back and check out Ernst Haeckel's history, he was reprimanded by his own university because what he had done was he had fabricated the photograph. Other scientists, in other words, had said, okay, if he's right, then I should be able to duplicate what he shows. So they would take the same creatures that he took, and they would take photographs of the developing embryos. And what he had done was perpetrate a total hoax. And it was published and published and published and published, and I think as far as the year 2000, maybe still, it was in some scientific textbooks. He was reprimanded by his own university because he had published a hoax. You know what I find? I find that very interesting. And I apologize because I don't want to get into defense of evolution. I'm not interested in that. But just for examples, I want to show you this. I find that very interesting because God has never perpetrated a hoax. God has said, this is the way I did it, and he has never changed his story. But the devil uses hoax. He uses deception. God is not the father of deception. The devil uses deception. The devil says this is the way it was when that's not the way it was. All right? And I'm just naming you a couple. I'll name you one more because this one is even more fantastic. In Nebraska, United States, a tooth was found. One tooth, one molar. From that one molar, they reconstructed the whole man. And they named him Nebraska Man. And I want to tell you that that is miraculous. Because I'm a dentist. And I can tell you that if you give me a molar, I cannot reconstruct the creature. I cannot tell you whether it's a man or an animal. I could to a certain extent, okay? Teeth from different creatures are different to a certain extent. So I can say, okay, well, this looks like a human molar, but it may not be. These people found this molar in Nebraska. They constructed the whole man. They constructed his wife. And they constructed a village. And then somebody found out that this molar came from an extinct pig. The Lord doesn't do this stuff. That's not the Lord's way. God doesn't do this stuff. God says, look, this is the way I did it. And then God says, look, you want to see the evidence? Look at the secular variation of the obliquity of the ecliptic. All right? Look at the boulders that have moved from place to place. Look at the mammoths frozen with subtropical vegetation, in their mouths and in their stomachs. Look at the petrified trees on Axel Heiberg Island near the North Pole. Do you follow what I'm saying? I hope that I'm helping you to see that God is exactly who He says He is. He's our Creator and our God. And He made the world in 6 literal 24-hour days, exactly as He said He did, and rested on the Sabbath and made the Sabbath a memorial forever for creation. And then He destroyed the world by a flood because of sin. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the evidence to develop our faith, our trust in God, our belief in God, and the Bible, and the flood. That's what I want to do. The theory. I'm going to look at a number of different things in the theory. You'll see some overlap with the evidence because I want to tie the evidence together. We're going to look at Earth's double rotation. We have not looked at that. We're going to look at the complete water canopy, the greenhouse effect. We will probably get through those 2 things today. The decrease in harmful shortwave radiation, worldwide uniform subtropical temperatures, 35% oxygen, we looked at from amber bubbles, we'll look at that again. Increased atmospheric pressure, decreased gravity, dinosaurs and megafauna, we looked at those before. Gradual decline in O2, oxygen. Longevity of life, we looked at that before. Stopping the second rotation. George Dodwell, we just looked at him. And the Ice Age. And then we'll look at a few other things. Lois, Hezekiah and the sundial, remember that story from the Bible? The Aurora Borealis Australis, creation's tiny mysteries, and Gondwanaland Pangaea. So we're going to start with the double rotation. Now, if you think about it, for the major time periods that we use, there is a physical phenomenon, correct? If we take a look at the day, what physical phenomenon marks the day? Rotation of the Earth once on its axis every 24 hours, right? Earth rotates once on its axis every 24 hours. That marks the day for us. The month, what marks the month? The moon rotates once around the Earth every 28 days approximately, right? The year? The Earth rotates around the sun once a year, every 365.25 days, right? The Earth rotates around the sun once. What about for the week? Isn't it interesting to you that we have a physical marker for the day, we have a physical marker for the month, and we have a physical marker for the year, but we don't have a physical marker for the week? I want to make a proposal, a suggestion, part of my theory. What if there was a double rotation before the flood? What I mean is the Earth rotates currently, is it that way or this way? I think it's this way. The Earth currently rotates like this, correct? What if this rotation continued and we added a second rotation so that as this rotation is continuing, this rotation also is taking place? So this rotation is every 24 hours. This rotation is every 7 days. Okay? I apologize because our shipment is not here. And in the material that I normally have, I have 2 gyroscopes. And I bring them. and when I spin those gyroscopes, I can show you a double rotation. Now, Jeremy, you've brought some magnets. What can you show us here?
This is, suppose this is the Earth. This is the way
The current
the Earth
rotation.
would rotate time d. But if you had a double rotation, it would rotate this way as well.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate that very much. Yes. And if I had a gyroscope, I can show you that a gyroscope will do a double rotation. Okay? And hopefully, when our stuff comes, I'll bring one day and I'll show you. And you can see the double rotation. A gyroscope will do a double rotation. And the interesting thing is when you have a gyroscope do a double rotation, remember a gyroscope has a wheel and a cage. Okay? And the wheel will be spinning rapidly and the cage will turn slowly. Remember what we said? 24 hours for the daily rotation, 1 week for the end-over-end rotation. Okay? Theory, the double rotation. End-over-end rotation once every 7 days. This was mentioned to me in a class that I was taking at Andrews University by Dr. Douglas Waterhouse. I'm not the one who came up with it. I want to give him credit. That's where it came from. He came one day to class, and I think there were 25 or 30 of us, I don't remember how many, in the class, and he asked us those questions. He said, there are physical phenomena to mark the time periods, and asked us what they were. And like you, we named them for him. And he said, what about the week? And he's the one who said, what if the Earth rotated end over end once every 7 days? A double rotation would eliminate the North and South Pole. There would be no cold spots on Earth. Remember, if you have a turkey and you're cooking the turkey over an open fire. Okay, sorry, back up. If you have a frozen turkey, we're starting with a frozen turkey. If you have a frozen turkey and you're cooking this bird over an open fire, so you have the fire burning here, we have the turkey on a stick, and we have a support system for the sticks. If I don't turn the turkey, this side will burn, this side will still be frozen, correct? But if I take the turkey, if I put a handle on the end of my stick, and I take the turkey and I just turn it slowly, you see what will happen? I will not have frozen turkey here and burnt turkey here. I can heat the turkey uniformly. If I have a double rotation, do you see that we will not have ice at the North Pole and we will not have ice at the South Pole? We will have subtropical temperatures all around the world. Between 24 and 27 degrees Celsius, that should read, not Fahrenheit. 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. This would have allowed the layer of water above the Earth to be complete and to stay in place. What we need to think about is the differential in temperature from the South Pole to the equator. I use the South Pole because that's the coldest place on Earth. It's colder than the North Pole. If we look at the temperature differential from the South Pole to the equator, it's about 200 degrees. Am I right? Do you follow me? If we go down to Antarctica, I hear them routinely telling me that the temperature in the middle of winter is minus 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't calculate that in centigrade. Minus 135 Fahrenheit. And what is the temperature at the equator? It's about 80, 84, 85, 90 degrees. So from minus 135 to 90, that's a temperature differential of 200 220 degrees, right? I'm going to talk in a minute about the water canopy. And what you'll find is if you have a water canopy surrounding the Earth and you have a temperature differential of 220 degrees from the equator to the South Pole, you cannot maintain that water canopy. I'll show it to you, okay? Chandler's wobble. Seth Chandler discovered in 1891 that the Earth's axis wobbles. So remember, I showed you precession, where every 25,700 and so many years, the Earth's axis is doing this. But Chandler also found that it wobbles as it does that. So it's not just going around in a smooth circle, it's doing this. Okay? I don't know if that illustrated it well enough. I apologize. I wish I could show it to you better. But it's wobbling. So it's not just going around in a smooth circle like this. It's going like this. Like a daisy, like a flower. Okay, it's wobbling as it moves. He discovered this in 1891. What I want to show you from George Dodwell and Seth Chandler is that the Earth's axis has not always been at 23.5 degrees. That's my point. Okay? The complete canopy of water. Complete, unbroken, all-encompassing layer of water surrounding the Earth, as if there was a bubble around the Earth. So you have the Earth, and then you have air, the atmosphere, and then you have a bubble of water. Unbroken, similar to a bubble of water around the Earth. With heat sink properties, water acts like a heat sink. You follow what I mean? If you drive a car, you know that you must have coolant in your radiator. If you don't, your engine will burn up. Why? Because water can hold heat. And it can release heat. I don't think here in Singapore you need to put warm air in your car. But in America, in the winter, it gets cold. And we can use the water circulating around to cool the engine, to put heat into the interior where the people are, because water acts like a heat sink. It absorbs heat from the engine and it can be released into the inside of the car. Yeah? Water acts like a heat sink. It has heat sink properties. The canopy was probably not round, and the reason it was probably not round is because we have gravitational pull from the sun and the moon. Those gravitational pulls currently affect the oceans, and therefore we have tides. And if we had a complete water canopy around the Earth, the gravitational pull from the sun and the moon would also affect that water, and you would find that the bubble is oblong wherever the sun and the moon are. Okay? The water that God placed above the atmosphere in Genesis 1, verses 6 to 8. Here's a diagram that I took from a book called The Creation Evolution Controversy by R.L. Wysong, and he shows a couple of interesting things. Here's ozone. We have ozone above the Earth now. As you know, the ozone layer is breaking down. And because the ozone layer is breaking down, more harmful shortwave radiation is entering Earth's atmosphere, causing skin cancer, sunburn, cataracts, perhaps other things. Here is the water canopy. Here is the air where the birds fly, the atmosphere, and this is the Earth, the surface of the Earth. If we had a complete water canopy, It would allow long wave radiation to come through. Long wave radiation, if you study the subject, is not harmful. Long wave radiation is what gives us warmth, heat. But it would block shortwave radiation. Some shortwave radiation is blocked by ozone. Even more shortwave radiation is blocked by water. Anybody who operates shortwave radio knows this. Because if you are a ham radio operator and you have cloudy conditions, your signal will bounce off the clouds down to another country. So from the United States, for example, if I want to talk to somebody in Asia, if I have cloud cover over the Pacific, this is wonderful. Because then I can beam my shortwave radio signal up to the clouds over the Pacific Ocean, and the clouds will bounce the signal down into Asia somewhere. But if I don't have that cloud cover, then I cannot reach Asia because the shortwave radio signal will go straight out into outer space. Make sense? So this would describe conditions pre-flood if we had the water canopy, okay, and the the double rotation. Now here are conditions post-flood. The water canopy has been destroyed. Are there, by the way, any remnants of the water canopy? Sorry? Clouds, exactly. The clouds are remnants of the water canopy. They are up there. Sometimes we see good cloud cover. Sometimes it's broken. Sometimes the sun shines through. Remnants of the water canopy are up there, okay? But here's a diagram of what happens when we have thinning ozone, we're losing the ozone layer, and we have no water canopy, or the water canopy is broken, all right? So no clouds here in this sky. Long wave radiation comes in as normal, but instead of remaining here, it reflects back out into outer space. You don't have the greenhouse effect, so long wave radiation comes in, reflects back out. You have ozone destruction by the long wave radiation. Shortwave radiation, instead of being reflected, comes through. Ozone, the thin layer of ozone will block some, but the thinner the layer of ozone, the less shortwave radiation that is blocked. Shortwave radiation is harmful, as I mentioned, right? This would be conditions post-flood, after the flood. That's where we'll stop for today. Are there questions? Anyone have questions? Yes, Sunny. I'm sorry? Can the ozone be repaired? It's a good question. It's an excellent question. We've damaged it a lot. Remember that some of the most serious damage was done by fluorocarbons. Chlorine compounds, fluorine compounds, propellants in spray bottles, spray cans. Theoretically, we know how to generate ozone. Copiers generate ozone, photocopiers. And so if you stand near a photocopier, you might smell a certain smell, and it generates ozone. Okay? But we know how to manufacture ozone. We can make ozone. Can we make enough of it to repair the ozone canopy? Good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer. What I know is this. Remember in Revelation, what does Revelation say? Jesus says he's going to come back to destroy those who destroy the earth. Yeah? So what we know is that when the Lord comes, in essence, we have destroyed the earth. Humans have destroyed the earth. Because this is what it says in Revelation. So we have technology to generate ozone. Can we generate enough to replace it? Because remember, with what we're doing currently, we're destroying ozone at quite a rapid rate. Remember, you've heard many times the hole in the ozone layer is over Antarctica and coming up to Australia. If you go to Australia and you go out into the sun, you will damage your eyes if you don't wear sunglasses. Because the shortwave radiation is so intense coming in through the hole in the ozone. I have a feeling that we can't repair it, but I can't say that for sure. We know how to generate it. So the thing is that the destructive effects are residual. Do you know what I mean? We created so many fluorocarbons in I don't know what time period, you know, when did we start making those? 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, before we removed them. We no longer use them. From what I understand, around the world, I think we've banned them. I think there's a worldwide ban on fluorocarbons because they destroy the ozone layer. But the effect is residual. And so once the destruction started, let's say we stop putting any more fluorocarbons into the atmosphere, the destructive effect continues because the fluorocarbons that we have already put into the air don't disappear instantly. They disappear slowly, chemical reaction. You know, as chemical reactions take place, they get removed. So I really don't have an answer for the question. You know, the possibility is there, I suppose, if we developed enough ozone generators, but we would also have to stop destroying the ozone that's up there. You know. Any other questions? Yes.
Dr. Peter.
Yes, please call me Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the double rotation
Yes.
occurring around the time of the flood. And is there any evidence linking this recession of this double rotation with the tilting of the earth to the flood, especially with the part that the Bible says that the fountains of the deep were broken?
Yes. We'll talk about that more. I'm going to show you stuff. Now remember, this is my theory from Dr. Waterhouse. I borrowed it from him, okay? But he didn't develop it as far as I did. So I took what he said and I developed it further. And I'm going to show you all kinds of stuff. I'm going to show you all kinds of things, all right? I cannot prove that this was so. But I can show you that the breaking open of the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven could have been because the second rotation was stopped. Yeah. We'll look at that.
According to the Bible, the waters cover the highest mountains and 20 cubits over. So
Yes.
where do you think the water has gone to?
Yes. We're going to talk about that some too. So I'll give you a partial answer now. Is that okay? And then later I want to look at other stuff. I'll show you other stuff, okay? Remember this. The Bible says that the highest mountains were covered with 22 cubits of water. What is the highest mountain on earth? Mount Everest. Everybody knows that. How high is it? Almost 7 miles, isn't it? Is that right? Or is that right? It's very high. If you do a search on the internet and look for fossils of sea life, you will find that there are fossils of marine life on the top of Mount Everest. Now, I have a question. If we took all the water on the earth today and all the ice and we melted it, so we melt the glaciers, we melt the snow on the mountains, we melt the North Pole, we melt the South Pole. Do we have enough water to go 5 miles deep? We don't. Absolutely not. We don't. That can only mean one other thing. Do you see this? It can only mean one other thing. And that is, at one time, Mount Everest was very low. Yes? If you study the Bible carefully, you will find that the Bible tells us that mountains rose up and islands disappeared. The upheaval during the flood was tremendous. Mrs. White tells us, okay, that there were no high, jagged mountains before the flood. No. So Mount Everest has fossils of marine life very near the top. That tells us that at one time, Mount Everest was at sea level. And Mount Everest has risen up because of the disasters that took place on the earth during the flood. And other places that may have been islands have disappeared. Remember, there was not only the windows of heaven were open, but the fountains of the great deep were also broken up. And so water came from two places. Water came from rain, and water also came up from under the earth. Yes? Yeah. That's from the Bible, right? Yeah. Any other questions? I hope what I'm doing, I hope you can see what I'm doing. I want you to see that God has left us evidence. And if we look carefully at the evidence, you will see that it points out that God created the world in 6 literal 24-hour days. And then because of sin, he destroyed it with a flood. David, yes?
Is Dr. Beer's research scientific?
Sorry?
Is Dr. Beer's research considered scientific? Is it either?
I haven't read the whole 228 pages. It's pretty scientific. I would, if you want to look into it, download it. You can download it off the internet. I think Barry Setterfield has it on his website. It's 228 pages long.
Other than what he says, is there anyone else who says the same thing?
There are, well, I don't know. I've looked into it a little bit, but the canopy theory that I'm proposing to has been proposed by others. That has been proposed by others. But one of the guys who proposed it was Larry Vardaman, who is a PhD from the Institute for Creation Research. And Larry Vardaman looked at it, and Larry Vardaman said, all right, if you raise water up into the atmosphere to complete the canopy, it will increase pressure, atmospheric pressure. And if you increase atmospheric pressure, the temperature will rise. And he's correct. That's right. However, Larry Vardaman did not look at a second rotation. So when he looked and said, if we have a canopy and we raise it up, the temperature will go up. And his look at the temperature is, if we raise the temperature because we increase the pressure, the temperature that we get to will be unsurvivable. All right? But Vardaman didn't look at the second rotation. And the second rotation would change that. Remember the example of the turkey on the spit, okay? If you don't move it, one side is going to burn and the other side is going to remain frozen. But if you turn it, you can evenly distribute the heat, right? So,
Second rotation.
yes.
It is not occurred to me. How is it possible that 4,000 years ago it occurred?
I'm not asking you to believe that it did occur. I'm proposing that this is my theory, and what I want you to do is I want you to look at the evidence, okay? And so what I would suggest is, you don't have to believe it if you don't want to. I'm not suggesting that. But what I want you to do is consider things like progressive creation. Think about this. Progressive creation is the idea that God created everything and then just let it run for hundreds of millions of years before he created Adam and Eve. And during those hundreds of millions of years, things died, things changed, things evolved, until we reached the evolution of man. Does that fit the Bible the existing evidence, and the laws of science. Far from it. Think about this. If you have death of all the organisms in order to evolve over hundreds of thousands, millions of years, things are dying in order to evolve into something else, to change into something else. Survival of the fittest. If you have death taking place and all these organisms are dying, then death is not the wages of sin. Death is a natural consequence of life taking place. It's a natural consequence of evolution, which is what the devil wants you to believe. But God has said what? The wages of sin is death. Yes? If you believe in progressive creation, if you believe in the gap theory, if you believe in the day-age theory, I've explained those briefly before. If you want to know more about them, you can ask me. If you believe in any of those theories, then you believe that death took place before sin entered the picture. If you believe that death took place before sin entered the picture, then death cannot be the wages of sin. If death is not the wages of sin, then why do you need a savior from sin? Do you follow? If you look at the three premises that I am suggesting that you always consider, must fit the Bible, must fit the existing evidence, and must fit the laws of science, then you cannot believe possibly in progressive creation. You cannot believe in the day-age theory. You cannot believe in the gap theory. And you certainly cannot believe in evolution. And what I want to do, I'm not saying I'm right, but what I want to do is I want to paint a picture for you of a theory that does fit the Bible, that does fit the existing evidence, and that does fit the laws of science, so that if you or your young people, our students, are hit with evolution, you will have another explanation that you can turn to, and you can say clearly, I have another explanation for that fits exactly what the Bible says. That's my purpose. If you don't like the theory for evolution, that's fine. Okay? If you don't like what I propose, that's fine. But make sure whatever theory you believe fits those three criteria. And if you find something better, tell me. I would like to know. Yes? I would love to know. I want to know. Yes?
Just in case that after the flood, the atmosphere has been decreased from 35% to 21%. If we make this room to 35% oxygen, what does it mean?
Do you know we have examples of that? Yes, we have. We haven't looked at it carefully enough, but I'm going to show you some examples actually. But let me just mention, okay? Hyperbaric chamber. Ever heard of those? You know, if somebody dives in the sea and they come up too fast, they get what is called the bends. Bubbles of nitrogen in the bloodstream, right? And if somebody gets the bends, they fly them immediately to a hyperbaric chamber and put them inside. When they put somebody in a hyperbaric chamber, interesting things happen. If you have the bends, a hyperbaric chamber is going to increase the pressure and increase the oxygen to try to get rid of the nitrogen bubbles in your system. And that's how they save your life. You'll die if you don't do that, okay? So that's how they save your life. Do you know that if you are a big sports figure, if you are somebody famous, in America at least, I don't know about the rest of the world, I'm sure people have thought of this. In America, if we have some famous guy, some famous football player or basketball player, and he receives an injury, the first thing they do now is they put him in a hyperbaric chamber. Do you know why? What they do, the hyperbaric chamber, is that atmosphere I described. Increased pressure, increased oxygen. Okay? Both of those things are there. Do you know what happens? The guy will heal faster. He heals much faster in a hyperbaric chamber. So we have evidence, we need to look at it. But we have evidence of what increased oxygen and increased pressure will do. We'll talk about it more because in the theory, I'm going to develop more of that. So if you don't mind, we'll talk about it more.
So I think we need to have an oxygen mask.
Do you know that there are people who sell this stuff? There are people who sell it in the cities now. They sell oxygen. You can purchase it by time, or you can buy your own little canister. And remember Michael Jackson? Sorry? Yeah. He had a hyperbaric chamber. He slept in a hyperbaric chamber. But obviously it didn't help him. Marcel? Hyperbaric chamber is also considered a form of doping. Yeah, why? Because what happens? Higher oxygen content in the blood, right? And so your performance is going to be enhanced. Yeah.
You know of a way to make a chamber with high pressure? We can do it ourselves.
I know of ones that are already created, but I don't think I have the engineering skills to help you with the development of your own. We have them, we use them. We use them in hospitals and in different locations for people who do a lot of diving. Generally, they have access to a hyperbaric chamber. So we have them, and they are available for purchase for personal use. Michael Jackson had his own. His was not, I'll show you a picture of one where they have constructed it out of steel and plexiglass and so on. Michael Jackson's was something like a glorified sleeping bag. Okay, you crawl right inside this thing and you seal yourself in and you increase the pressure in the bag and you increase the oxygen content, okay? So those are available commercially, you can buy them. Yes.
Practically speaking, will it increase your lifespan? Will it be beneficial?
We're going to look at that. We're going to look at that, okay? And what we're going to look at is evidence, okay? I can't prove to you that this is so, but we can look at the evidence for what is there. And so what I want to do is I want to look at the evidence. So can we give it a little time and we'll look, okay? Because we're gonna address that. We're gonna look at that, okay? Yeah. Any other questions? I hope that what I share with you has been a blessing. And I'm going to ask the pastor to come up and close the Sabbath for us, and we'll sing some songs and say a prayer, and appreciate your attention.